Okay, cool. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about self-management. And we talk about self-management all the time, but what actually is it? And how does it work? What does it mean for us? What are we going to do? How do we know if we're doing it right? These are the questions that I want to address. And I want to look at 3 different perspectives on what self-management is. I want to start with an organizational design perspective, which will be familiar to quite a lot of you already. We've talked about it, but it's worth kind of recapping. Then I want to move on to a data-driven perspective, which will be new to you all. And it's really a data-driven perspective on management, which opens up some interesting questions about what it means to self-manage. And then finally, I want to come back to a developmental perspective, which again will be familiar. We're going to come back into the world of Keegan. And there are going to be some, that's the bit that I'm most worried about presenting remotely, because there are going to be some slides there. And yeah, that material is pretty dense. So we'll cope with that when we come to it. Right, let's dive in. The organizational design perspective. Here is this wonderful graph by Richard Hackman, which we have seen many times. And you can see what's going on here, right? This is Richard Hackman's classification of different kinds of self-organization. And we've got along the bottom axis the different kinds of self-organization, manager-led teams, self-managing teams, etc. And then we've got the different levels of the different things that the team takes on the vertical axis on the left. Now, we talk about self-management, and one view of self-management is this narrow view of self-management that is this particular stage in the development of self-organization when a team takes responsibility from a manager for monitoring and managing work, process, and progress. It's not necessarily, like, it might be the case that Holacracy actually functions as a self-designing system or a self-governing system, but at the heart of it, there are self-managing teams. So I think it's helpful to go back and say, let's look at, like, in the work, what's actually happening there, right? What is the core of self-management? So self-managing teams monitor and manage work, process, and progress. And what does this mean? This means that in a self-managing team, right, the team checks whether or not they are on track and takes action whether or not they're on track. So that's monitoring and managing the progress of the work. The team decides how to work, which is managing the process. And also the team resolves conflicts and fixes problems in the team, right? So this is really the kind of core idea in self-management, right? Which is, in self-managing teams, the teams themselves are responsible for how they work. Maybe somebody outside the team puts requirements on the team for what it is that they have to deliver, but the team is responsible for how they deliver that. And there are a whole load of different schools of thought about how management should work and what self-management might mean and how self-managing teams should be, how self-managing organizations or future work organizations should be put together. But I think one of the things that is common across all of them and is really key is this idea of being in charge of how you do the work, right? I've talked about this before, because this is where, well, there are all kinds of reasons for this. One is it makes work more creative, right? Because if you are in charge of how you work, you're able to be more creative, you're able to have more agency over it. And that just seems to be like a really important thing for human flourishing, that people have agency over their work. That's the first thing. But then the second thing is that actually work generally goes better when the people who are doing the work are in charge of how the work gets done, because they are the ones who know most about it, right? So that's where the kind of power of self-managing teams come in. So that for me is the really key one. Okay, let's jump back into the slides. So the team resolves team conflict and fixes problems in the team. Now, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, in fact. I can't remember which topic it was. So I think it was the week before last. About the fact that, in self-management, we all, like in a manager-led team, on this kind of last about team resolves team conflicts and fixes problems, right? In a manager-led team, the manager is doing their job well if the manager notices that Bob and Susan are, not getting on, right? So that they're not working well together. So the manager goes to talk to Bob and find out, what's going on for Bob, and then they talk to Susan and they find out what's going on for Susan, and they, they carry information between them, bring them back together, and they fix that relationship, and the performance in the team goes up, and they did a good job, right? That's kind of what it is to be a manager of a team of people. But in self-management, nobody does that for us. Thank you to whoever just crept under the webcam. Very nice. Didn't even spot who you were. Congratulations. In the self-managing team, nobody does this for us. We have to be our own solvers of conflict and our own sensors of conflict all the time. It requires a high level of emotional maturity for all of us, because conflict is stuff that is, getting in the way of us doing the work, right? As that slide says, fixing problems in the team. Let's go back to the screen share. Fixing problems in the team and conflict, right, is about monitoring and managing the process of how the work gets done, right? We don't want conflicts in the way of our process. Okay, so this is one model of self-management, but sort of as I said, so there's no need then for a dedicated manager to track the status of work, have a status meeting, tell the team what to do, decide when a team member needs to be taken aside, monitor things in the project management tool, right? These are things that are all done by the team collectively and as a team in a self-managing team. So the minimum requirement in this diagram, where we have these various stages of self-organization, the minimum requirement for us to say we are self-managing is that all of these things on this slide are done collectively by the team, okay? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that in a self-managing organization there are no managers, because look, although there are these shaded steps for the team, there are also these white steps as well. There are these various stages of self-organization in which there might be some things that are management responsibility. So, another framework, which is, as I've said a couple of times before, it's going to be interesting to compare Alacrity to, because they're both quite well-developed frameworks for self-organization on a kind of company-wide scale. Is large-scale Scrum, right? And there are actually managers in Scrum. There are organizations that are practicing self-management where there are managers, but their role is different, right? Their role is not to do any of these sort of typical managery things, but instead their role is to educate the team on how to solve problems for themselves. Their role is to improve the organization, so to take away impediments to performance within the organization, stuff that is in the way of the team, and to, as it says here, to practice Go-See, which is this concept that originally comes from Toyota, which is this idea that managers should go and actually see what's happening in the work so that they can coach it more effectively and not just sit in their office looking at reports. So there is a functioning framework of self-managing teams that says, hey, yeah, there should be these managers, and it's really important that there's both transparency from the team going up and that there's this Go-See approach from the managers going down. And I think that frames something interesting for us to think about, like, what is the leading role? That for me is like a big question about, like, like thinking about self-management and thinking about sort of management in general and thinking about these disciplines. There are all kinds of views on what the leading role is. There's some stuff which is somewhere on, probably pinned to Alacrity discussion from Alacrity One's own Alacrity Habits series about the leading role. And I've sort of seen a load of posts on the Alacrity community in practice about, like, well, what is the leading role? What is it when it's done well? And there are just loads of different views. And it's very easy to think, oh, maybe the lead link is a manager because they do some of these manager type things, so they need manager type skills. What should they be doing? But that's why I really like this this quote about Scrum, this idea that there is transparency, because this is the thing that we know that these things do, right? They put in place sort of systems to create transparency because they're responsible for metrics and checklists, but they don't use the information to control the team, and they don't put additional things in place. So maybe it's interesting to point us towards the direction of what success under these think role might look like. Okay, so that's kind of one perspective on self-management, is this organizational design perspective, and it's about saying the minimum that we need to be, say we're self-managing as a team, is to take responsibility for monitoring and managing the process and the progress. So here's another perspective, the data-driven perspective. Now, what do managers do, right? There are loads of different answers to this question. I find this fascinating that, in the sort of 20-year period from 1975 to 1997, the number of books on management theory more than tripled. I mean, it's like, you want to get some, there's this, like trying to find out from a book how to be a good manager is like trying to find out from a book how to be a good parent. For any book that tells you to do one thing, you can find another equally well-respected book that tells you exactly the opposite. How do you navigate this, right? How do you navigate this plurality of views? Some of which are, maybe like different sort of valid, helpful, but contradictory approaches, and some of which are just complete guff, right? How do we actually navigate this? So, there is a great book by the Gallup organization that survey people, and the book is called First Break All the Rules. And this book is all about studying the great versus the good of work, right? And they're really keen on this distinction. It's not about, the great versus the bad or the great versus the average. It's about saying, let's look at really good teams that have really good results, and then let's look at teams that have really great results, and let's try and get to the difference. And there's a lot of work that's gone into this this study, right? They spent 25 years employing and surveying over 1 million employees, asking them hundreds of questions to try and understand what makes for a high-performing team, and they cross-referenced that against 2,500 business units, 24 companies, and then they've done interviews with managers of 1,500 of the best teams, and they found out a load of stuff, and some of what they found out I'm going to focus on today. What they found out was that great managers, and that means managers of great teams, however that's measured in an organization, and they make the point which is, some organizations actually have, specific measures, and some it's a bit more informal. But what they found was great managers have something in common. Although they maybe have very different styles, and it maybe feels very different to work for them, and you do very different kinds of work, there seems to be one thing that these 1,500 people that they interviewed had in common, which the managers of merely good teams didn't have. And it's quite surprising, right? And it's this. It's a belief that people don't really change that much, right? And they summarize it by saying, don't waste time trying to put in what was left out. Try to draw out what was left in. That's hard enough. Now, that is kind of surprising, right? That is the thing that they found that distinguished really great managers. So kind of what's going on there. Now, something that's maybe a bit surprising about that is, there we go. And it's like, it seems that the wisdom of great managers is that people don't change, but aren't we talking about learning and developing and changing all the time? And the sort of the way that I understand this is, maybe there is a kind of core element of you that either stays the same or really only changes in this kind of, sort of like the movement of tectonic plates, slowly and steadily, but over just an enormous period of time, right? Almost imperceptibly, or like a flow of glass down a window pane. And this is the phenomenon where somebody who you went to primary school with, meets you and says, oh, you haven't changed a bit, or some elderly relative who you haven't seen since you were like, 12 tells you that you haven't changed at all. And you think, what are you talking about? I've done nothing but change. I mean, look at me, I'm a grown adult, I'm completely different. But there's maybe some sort of, like, there's something that we can quantify, some unit, some kind of thing that stays the same through all of those changes. And what is that? And what the Gallup book is offering, what it's saying that these great managers subscribe to, is the talent model. So they mean something quite specific when they say that people don't change. And the talent model is, I just wait for there's going to be, there we are, is that a talent is a recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that can be applied productively. And, you know, what they have found is that in these really great teams, it seems that talent is a better predictor of success than experience, brain, or willpower. And by talent, you know, what we're kind of talking about here is like aptitude for a specific kind of work. And I think this does make sense, right? The idea that some people are just more drawn to some kinds of work or are going to be more successful in some kinds of work than other people, right? So to be really good at sales, there are some just specific talents, right? If you don't like talking to people and understanding people and interacting with people a lot, if that's something that just really doesn't come naturally to you, if it's not one of your talents, if it's not like a, you know, like an 8-lane highway in your kind of internal world on which you can kind of pour yourself into the world, right? Then doing a sales role is going to be like pulling teeth. You know, you're just going to work and work and work, and you're going to get nowhere. I mean, I'm sure I mean, I don't know. I was going to say, I'm sure we've all. I know that I have found myself in my life in situations where I've been in, you know, projects or roles where they've not really been aligned with my talents. I've really been working against the grain. And it's been like, oh, when am I going to make a success of this? How is this going to work out well? But when I found myself in situations when, oh, actually, I am applying my talents, it's like, wow, it's amazing how much I can get done. Right? Does that make sense to people? Does that fit with people's kind of experience of work? That there are some things that it just seems it's easier to pour yourself into and make success at versus other things? That kind of fit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Nodding is quite hard to pick up on the camera, so I just wanted to hear somebody say yes. Now I've heard it, I feel so much better. Right. Let's go. So, if we subscribe to this talent model and this idea that everyone has their own different kind of motivations and different ways of relating, then it's like the manager's role is to release people, to be like a catalyst for people's talents, to both help them release their talents more fully for their own personal development, but also to help them release their talents more fully for the good of the organization and furtherance of the goals of the organization. And I think one of the reasons why, Gallup makes so much of this in this book is it does sort of run counter to this value that we have in our culture, which is, and I mean the culture of our society rather than just the culture of poetry, which is, like everybody can do everything, like anybody can be trained up to do any job, and, people are just totally sort of fungible, and they're like, no, actually in great teams, the managers do not believe this. They believe that actually people are different and that things should not be standardized, and that it's not just a question that if somebody isn't performing, you should just train them. If they're not performing in a role, it really might mean that they're genuinely not suited to that role. So this then transforms into 4 key things that managers do. Selecting people, right? And that means selecting people for their talent, not their experience or how hard they're going to work or anything like that, but actually matching work to people's talents, understanding the talents and understanding the talents needed in the work and matching those things together. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, setting expectations, right? So defining the outcomes and not the steps. Well, this is interesting because this goes back to what we talked about sort of the first step of self-managing teams, where the teams are responsible for how they do stuff. Maybe the managers tell them, like what the goals are, what it is that they have to achieve, but the teams are responsible for doing that. And I mean, it's super interesting because actually in the Gallup book, they have this bit, and it's only a couple of pages, but where they're actually quite disparaging about the idea of self-managing teams, and they say, they've been tried and they don't work. Well, great thanks for that perspective, but but yet they say that actually great managers do this. They find people with talents and then they let them express those talents. They get out of the way, defining outcomes rather than process. Okay, managers, really great managers also motivate people by focusing on strengths rather than on weaknesses, which is don't try and, sort of fill in people's gaps. Don't try and get people to come up to standard with the stuff that isn't one of their talents, but go in and find out the talents and really catalyze them, really maximize them, really make space for them to express them in the fullest possible way, which then also links to developing the person, which, you know, it's kind of a mix of two things in this idea, one of which is around, you know, a kind of personal development, but like professional development, career development. It's about saying really great managers create environments in which people don't just progress by, you know, and actually this is specifically a response to the Peter Principle, right? It's kind of specifically about saying, you know, that in most organizations, people get promoted to the point of incompetence. You know that kind of old phrase? That someone is like, you get promoted until you reach a role that you're no longer able to do. Because you get promoted because you're able to do a role really well, right? So what it's saying here is that, slides. The good managers create an environment in which there's progression without the need to say, oh yeah, you have to stop being an awesome individual contributor and become a manager now because that's the ladder. But instead they find a way of saying, well, actually, you know, management itself requires certain talents. And if you have these really awesome talents as an individual contributor, we should create a framework where you can really have a sense of progression and you can really see what the milestones are in your career without having to go down a management track. You should just be able to become a better and better individual performer, right? So that's kind of what's going on with number 4. So what this is saying is that according to this data, a great manager does these 4 things, and these 4 things are kind of what we would call managing the people, right, rather than managing the work. And remember, we've talked about this bit of jargon before. Maybe some of you haven't heard this idea that, you know, in holacracy, we manage the work, but we don't manage the people, right? And that's because these 4 kind of key people management things, in self-management, you do for yourself. You have to be your own great manager. So you have to be responsible for motivating yourself and developing yourself, etc. Right? Now it's interesting to think, where does this fit into that Hackman framework, right? Which of these things are the activities of a self-organizing team that is self-management in the, you know, in the strict minimal sense of the word, and which of these things actually require something broader, like something more like self-governance or something like self-designing or self-governing in a team. But I think that this data-driven perspective is really interesting on self-management, right? Saying, like, what is it that managers do? Are we actively feeling that any of these things are important in our working lives right now, right? Having somebody to be responsible for motivating us, or responsible for developing us in some way, or responsible for helping us match up our, you know, responsible for basically being a catalyst for our talent within the organization. And if we are expecting somebody else to do it, then, you know, we're probably not self-managing as fully as we can be, which isn't to say that we don't need to have structures in place to help us do these things. But in self-management, we do these things for ourselves. Okay, that's the second perspective on self-management. Let's see, how are we doing for time? Okay, nicely. So now, the developmental perspective. Here comes a diagram. Ta-da! Now, this diagram is explaining subject-object development, right? This work by Robert Keegan that we talk about all the time. And part of what I want to do in this section, this particular perspective on self-management, is lay out some of the ways that this is really specific to work. And I have talked about some of this before, not for about a year in a sort of general GTF session. It comes up a bit for those of you who come to the open culture interview training sessions, particularly in recent weeks, but it's not been very widely disseminated, so it feels like a good time to kind of share this way. Okay, so in subject-object theory, there are 2 things, subject and object. And in this diagram, the dark blue circle represents the object, and the light blue circle represents the subject. And what that kind of points out to us is that it's like the outermost layer in our meaning making, in our interior experience, in the way that we're making sense of the world, in the way that we're constructing our reality. That's the subject. It's the outermost bit, and subject-object development from one level to the next. You know, all of these levels, 2, 3, 4, 5, or the various names that they have, right? What it means to develop from one level to another is that the thing that was previously subject becomes object, and a new outer layer of subject experience is forged, right? So that's what this diagram is trying to show. This is about sort of two stages side by side. Now, the thing that is subject is the thing that is ultimate in our meaning making, right? It's kind of the lens that we see through. We can't see it because it is the lens. We look through it rather than looking at it. We can't operate on it, we can't reflect on it, we can't regulate it. We make sense of the world through it, right? Now, this is the concept that's kind of core to this stuff, that is, you know, kind of weird and maybe in a way hard to wrap your head around. But at the bottom of this slide, I've pointed out three different stages of development, 2, 3, and 4. And these are the layers that are, these are the things that are subject, are ultimate, are this, you know, kind of outside layer, this light blue layer in each of those stages. And they are the concrete, the abstract, and the systemic. And I want to just take a moment to explain this as best I can, without the aid of a whiteboard. You know, this is where I've disadvantaged myself by trying to do it correctly. So I want to start with the claim that for level 2, which is like older primary school kids, right? Level 2 is the stage that we are in when we go into our teenage years and transition into level 3. Primary school kids are very concretely oriented. The concrete is the highest level in their thinking. Now, here is a real clue for this. Are you smarter than a 10-year-old? Now, actually, if you think about the television program, Are You Smarter Than a 10-Year-Old? What they really mean is, can you marshal concrete facts more effectively than the 10-year-old? And the answer for almost all of us is almost certainly no. You know, I mean, I cannot remember the order of, you know, the kings of England or the relative sizes of, you know, like the counties of the UK or, you know, all of the departments of France or whatever, right? But these concrete facts, like, kids love these facts, right? You know, they really, really love these kind of concrete facts. And it's because their world is very concrete. They're very appealing to kids who are that age. And, you know, children are very interested in, like, we say this stuff around, you know, like, that they make sense of the world in terms of sort of, you know, am I going to get in trouble or not? This idea of getting in trouble. It's all around like sort of concrete consequences. If you ask, you know, a 10-year-old, who is your favorite teacher and why? You know, it will be like, well, Mrs. Jones is my favorite teacher because she always gives me, you know, like a gold star, or because she produces, you know, really helpful handouts or whatever, right? It's generally going to be really concretely oriented to stuff that's like real stuff that's out there. And if we imagine, if we go back to this sort of transition diagram, yes, this one here, that if we can imagine at the second stage that this like outer layer is, you know, the concrete stuff, what that means is that when we get into the third stage, the concrete has become part of our object world, something that we can reflect on, etc., and something new has become subject. And the new thing that becomes subject is the abstract, because the abstract is about organizing the concrete. It's about and what happens, by the way, in this transition, that this that this diagram with the circles doesn't quite make clear is that in each stage, the thing that, the new subject thing that we have, the new thing that's ultimate, is at a higher order of complexity. It is a thing that consists of relationships between, i.e., like a way of organizing, right? Relationships between the things that were previously the highest. Are you with me at this point?
Yeah.
More or less. Yeah. So the idea that the abstract is about relationships between concrete things, I think that kind of makes sense, right? That we sort of say, in that sense, like relationships between human beings are abstract. They're not things that are real and concrete and tangible. You can't reach out and touch them. Human beings are concrete things. You can reach out and touch us. And the relationships between us, which we would say exist, right? Because we've all got at least a level 3 perspective available to us, is these things are real, but they are abstract, right? So that's a little bit about that about that distinction. And I'm going to dive into how this applies to the world of work, and hopefully I'm going to, by putting that into some more kind of real world terms, hopefully it will become a little bit clearer. So, what order of complexity is work, right? Concrete outcomes, achieving concrete outcomes is second order complexity. In other words, like you can give older kids an outcome to achieve and they will achieve that outcome. But a project, in the strict sense, is a minimally third order thing, right? It requires a third order capacity. Because a project is a thing that regulates a series of outcomes. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about the way in which the sort of natural project management approach, the getting things done project management approach that Holacracy encourages you to use, there's this idea that a project is a complex outcome. It has a whole number of things that you have to do first before you get there. The very definition of a project in the getting things done system is, it's a thing that you can't just actually go and do. Like, redecorate the house. I can't just stand up and do it. There are concrete actions that I need to take in order to do this, to achieve this goal that is sort of nested to get me to that end point. But, decorate the house is not in and of itself like a concrete action. Projects, therefore, require access to abstract thought because they are things that coordinate concrete actions. And in the same way, teamwork is also a third order requirement, right? And we've talked before about the way in which second order kids are notoriously kind of selfish, self-serving. There's the line that Keegan uses, which I like, which is, any sensitive and self-aware parent knows that their younger children would sell them for a cool drink on a hot day. So there's this idea that they can have goals and schemes and plans, but what you can't do at the second order is you can't coordinate those needs and plans in terms of how they might impact others, right? And we've kind of talked about this before, about this way in which at the third order we gain access to empathy. We start to have a richer model of how other people are operating and how we impact them. And this ability to coordinate our own sort of immediate concrete goals towards some greater shared aim and some sense of what's expected of us by other people is a third order capacity that we develop as teenagers. And this is one of the reasons why there's so much of an emphasis, traditionally anyway, in kind of secondary education on team sports. Or, for those of you who are, too dweeby like me for team sports, drama, or choirs, right? Something that you have to do as a team. Because one of the things that you are learning in high school, or actually, let's be more specific, one of the ways that you are developing in high school is you are developing this third order capacity. So they want to put in place experiences that force you to use that. Like you learn teamwork that's the point at which you can say, yeah, I didn't really do very much or anything very exciting, but we won, and therefore I feel good about that. Now, so project and teamwork are third order capacities. And because if you remember when we started with the circular diagram, the transition from one stage to the next means that the thing that was previously subject becomes object. So what that means is, if teamwork and projects are third order, they are things that we only become able to do at the third order. They are third order subject. That means they become object at the fourth order. So in other words, for those things to be object, for those things to be stuff that we operate on and regulate for ourselves, we have to have fourth order capacity. And think about the Hackman diagram, right? Monitoring and managing work, progress, and process. So we're talking about kind of like projects and teamwork. So a self-managing team operates on its projects and its teamwork. So that means that to be self-managing requires fourth order capacity, right? Here's another way that being self-managing requires fourth order capacity. Another view of, what complexity is work. Rules and roles are abstract, right? I mean, there's no concrete reality to a rule or a role. You can't reach out and touch it. It is an abstract thing. So to really get people to engage in a system of rules and roles requires a level 3 capacity. But at level 3, we are subject to the abstract, right? We're not a setter of terms on that. It is how it is, basically. It can be only one way, because we're identified with it in that sense. And so we're sort of limited at the third order between relationships between basically real things. Although, I've written that, and that's the one claim on that slide that I've looked at it, I'm thinking, I'm not totally sure about that. That might be a bit misleading. But, for the sake of all of our sanities, I'm going to press on. But I've warned you that that's the bit that I would take out if I had my time again. So rules and roles are abstract. Well, okay, so a system that generates and regulates rules and roles is systemic, right? So it requires a level 4 capacity. So this is why I made this thing about, as you see at the bottom, I have this idea, right? Like Andrew and Tin are real concrete things, and there is an abstract relationship between us. But Intop's lead link and tools that we use are not real concrete things. They are totally abstract things that have been made up. But there is a relationship that exists between the lead link of Intops and tools that we all use, right? But it's an entirely formal relationship. If relationships are it's an entirely formal relationship between entirely formal roles. And the ability to engage in this system, where there are these formal roles, and where there therefore are these relationships between abstract things, is a developmental capacity, is a fourth order capacity. There's more of this, I'm afraid, but there's not much more. There's not much more. Here is an extract from Keegan's In Over Our Heads, in which he talks about, and the whole book is basically about, what are the fourth order demands that are made on us by the modern world. And he summarizes, these are 5 of, I think, the 6 or 7 things, I've slightly edited it. He summarizes the demands that are made on us at work that are fourth order demands versus, kind of in the brackets, like a third order equivalent, right? So to be the owner of our work, to be self-initiating, self-correcting, self-evaluating, to be guided by our own vision, to conceive the organization from the outside in, and to take responsibility for what happens to us at work externally and internally. Oh, I've written for what happens to you at work. Anyway, it's for what happens to us. In each of these statements, there is there's a kind of subject well, let me show you. We can think of each of these statements is saying to us that something is object, that there is a requirement that something be object for us to meet the demands of the modern workplace. And interestingly, he is saying this about all workplaces. He is surfacing the fact that there are actually these implicit expectations, not just in self-managing work, but in all work. But I think it's particularly true in self-managing work. There's much less escape from the fact that these demands exist in self-managing work. So in each of these statements in bold, we are pointing towards something that has to be object for you to function effectively in a work environment. And in the bracket statement, what we're seeing is what it would be like if that thing was subject. So in the first statement, to be the owner of our work, right? That is saying that work, i.e. project and teamwork, is object to us. We can reflect on and regulate and organize for ourselves our work. We are not subject to one organization that has been at any one time, right? Because that's the thing about the subject. Remember, it's ultimate. We're identified with it. There's only kind of one thing that it can be. To be self-initiating, self-correcting, self-evaluating requires values and standards to be object for us, right? That we can generate values and standards and we can apply those to work. Similarly, we can generate our own vision. And then in number 4, conceive the organization from the outside in, right? This whole system of rules and roles is something that we can reflect on effectively, right? So these points that I've been making in this developmental section about projects, teamwork, rules and roles, etc., we can see that these are things that we need to be able to operate on and reflect on and have a subject in order to self-manage effectively. Number 5 in this, taking responsibility for what happens to us internally and externally, is interesting, right? And this really, we can go into a holacracy example here. Taking example, it's saying that that it's a fourth order thing to say that to be able to take responsibility for the future possibilities that we have, right? In holacracy, you cannot make other people responsible for your stuff. The whole system is set up to stop you from doing this. You can seek to convey your intentions to other people, and maybe they will share them, in which case, then it is then their stuff that they are responsible for. But if you have a client meeting on Tuesday and you need something for that meeting from another role, and that other role is not in any way invested in that client meeting, then holacracy very much says to you, hey, if you want that thing by that point in time, you have to keep hold of responsibility for the outcome of getting it. You cannot just say to the other person, will you deliver this to me by 5 o'clock on Monday, and then just, hope and blame. Just be like, well, they said they would, and I better have it, and if they don't, I'll be angry. It's like, no, if you need that thing, you better check in to get that thing. If you really need somebody else to do that for you, right? That's a key way that holacracy works, right? That requires that taking of responsibility. And here's another thing that's really key to the way that holacracy works, right? Is saying, that's not my role, or its cousin, right? That's not my tension. I am not interested in that. I am not going to do anything about that. And the thing is that it can look like holacracy requires us to be rude or aggressive or do something else that seems to have some kind of high emotional psychic cost for us. But actually, holacracy really invites us to work. It really invites, this kind of fourth order capacity, because it says, well, actually, for holacracy to function, we need to be able to say that's not my role, or that's not my tension, or just in general say no to stuff in a way that's very low cost. And in order to do this, we need this fourth order capacity, because the third order, let's call it mutuality, our relationships with other people and the expectations that they have on us are ultimate, right? And remember that capacity to really understand other people's expectations of us, to have a rich model of their inner lives carried around in our own head, to animate the world of other people in this incredibly rich way, is a wonderful human gift, right? And you know, it's really precious. And you know, every stage has its limitations. If that's the ultimate that we have, then it's very hard for us to disappoint other people. Like, impacting this mutuality, impacting this relationship negatively is something that comes at high cost. And I've put on here this reference to low agreeableness, which is about the big 5-factor personality model, which is really the only kind of sort of personality testing framework that has real scientific credibility, you know, among clinicians and academics sort of working in the field of psychology. And one of the big 5 factors is agreeableness, right? So holacracy, if you are not deploying a 4th order capacity, holacracy requires you to have very low agreeableness, because people who have low agreeableness are quite happy to say no to people, right? It's like, I don't mind, you know, that's I don't worry about the negative impact. Whereas actually, when we're in this situation where we're, you know, all taking responsibility in this way, then you know, it's not high cost for somebody to say to you, that's not my intention. It's not high cost for you to say to somebody else, that's not my intention, or that's not my role. And holacracy is really, like, it really only works if we do this, because otherwise, you know, the whole reason why we have governance, etc., is so that, you know, we are able to be conscious about where we put our attention, that we are able to direct ourselves towards sort of success in a coordinated way. And if we are forever doing things in a way that contravenes governance, we are doing things that are not our role, because we like to help people, because we like them, because we care about them, because we care about their success, right? Then we are not giving ourselves we're not getting the full power out of holacracy. We are not using it to consciously direct our attention, right? It's like, you know, Carolina was asking the other day about, oh, you know, will you send these people an NDA for this thing? And I was like, no, you know, it's not my role. It's not that I wouldn't like to help you. It's not, I don't necessarily feel bad that I've disappointed you, but it's not my role. It's not a thing that I should, you know, like, I'm trying to consciously direct my attention onto the things that I am responsible for in order that I can achieve my goals. This is the way of looking at the world that holacracy encourages to take. Okay. So we made it through the developmental section. Hey, we made it through the whole talk, actually. So some sort of takeaway things to think about off the back of this talk. We've explored various perspectives on what it might mean to be self-managing, how it might draw on some developmental capacities, how there are some things about people management, how there are some things about work management. And it's a question that I think it would be good for us to all ask ourselves. Where are you expecting others to manage you or to manage for you? You know, are you sort of expecting that somebody else will be responsible for your career development or for your personal development, or to motivate you, you know, to somehow, you know, align you with your work? Are you expecting that somebody else is going to take responsibility for monitoring and managing process and progress? You know, that somebody else is going to take you know, somebody else is going to be the person who deals with your blockers or whatever, right? Or are you asking somebody else to take responsibility for your experience? Or in turn, are you taking responsibility for somebody else's experience? When are we doing these things? Because when we are doing these things, we are not self-managing. We are not getting the power that comes from self-management. And a thought which I will come back to in a follow-up session is, what does this mean for the leading role? Right? We've looked at these various perspectives on self-management. We've said absolutely what, you know, like, there is no space for in a self-managing organization. We do it ourselves. But yet we have this kind of leading role. Like, what does the leading do? I mean, the leading is definitely not a manager, but what is the leading? It's something good to reflect on in terms of what you expect from your leading, and what leadings, in turn, what you expect to be other people to be getting from you, and what you expect to be, you know, getting from other people, and how that fits into this. So these are things for us to take away and reflect on. Great. Woo. We have a few minutes for some questions and some comments. Did the remote thing work okay? I mean, I imagine it was a bit less engaging than me being physically in the room for the people who were in the room, but did it work basically okay? Was it good enough, or was it sort of shit?
I think it was good.
Better than expected.
Yeah.
Okay, better than expected. I'll take that.
I have looked, but no. I'm particularly interested in part 2. That's for sure.
Part 2, oh, about the lead link.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was sort of, as I was, well, you see, like, took 55 minutes, I thought, oh, this lead link start, and I thought, no, there's not going to be any time. But it's some interesting context to set, right? If we think about, oh, we're trying to be kind of self-managing, and yet we have this other role. Well, what does it do, right? Particularly in the context of knowing that there are other self-managing systems that we could look at that do have manager roles, right? And that they do something. And is that what lead links do, or is it something else? And you know, there's good questions to be asking. Anyone for anyone? No? Absorbing? Okay. Cool. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Andrew.